begged this House do now adjourn.
The question is this House do now adjourn. Bim Afolami.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for coming to the House on this issue and meeting with me on this subject previously, as well as I thank the Secretary of State for the numerous conversations we've had in recent weeks on this matter. However, I've been forced to call this debate to ensure that Harpenden commuters get the good service that they deserve and pay good money for, Mr. Deputy Speaker, rather than facing years of disruption and a worse service. Now, lest I forget the other half of my constituency, I've been made aware, I'm very aware that there are concerns about the changes to the timetable from Hitchin Station as well as Harpenden Station in the north of my constituency, and I will correspond with the Minister in due course on that in further detail, although they will not be the main thrust of my remarks this evening. Now, before I go on, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am sure that the desired outcome for Thameslink is, eventually, a greatly improved service across the entire network. However, the immediate negative impact on commuters in Harpenden for the next 2 years is unacceptable to my constituents, and it's unacceptable to me. The key issue, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is a loss of services during peak morning and evening hours. Now, the first thing to be aware of is that Thameslink deem the peak morning period to be between 7 a.m. and 9:59, and this has led to much disagreement between Harpenden commuters, myself, and the operator. Now, regardless of what Thameslink describe or call the peak, most commuters from Harpenden travel to work between the hours of 6:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m., and between these times, Harpenden will see a net loss in service of 2 fast trains. Now, these fast trains are only partly compensated for by lengthening some trains from 8 carriages to 12 carriages. And Thameslink putting on extra trains after 9 a.m. in order to meet their sort of peak time requirements isn't going to help anybody trying to get to work on time in London, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In practical terms, for the House, the overall loss is 8 carriages between this key 2-hour slot. Now, this represents a loss of capacity amounting to over 1,100 people just in that 2-hour slot, sitting and mostly standing. Not only is the current demand, the existing demand, from Harpenden Station into London extremely high, but in addition, there will be an increased number of passengers on the train before it gets to Harpenden Station, as East Midlands trains are reducing the number of trains stopping at Bedford. So many thousands of effectively new commuters will also be using these services. So to sum up this part of my speech, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Harpenden is getting a reduction in service and an increase in passengers. And I'm not getting into the general growth of Harpenden as a town over the next couple of years, making the commute from Harpenden not merely inconvenient, but for many, unbearable. Now, when you compare this to St Albans, a town not far away from Harpenden, commuters from St Albans, by comparison, will be gaining fast trains during peak hours, as well as slow trains, and a net increase of 44 carriages. So to put this into some sort of context, that is an increase of 6 times the number that Harpenden is losing. Now, I'm fully aware that St Albans has approximately double the footfall of Harpenden, but I think it'd be quite clear to any objective observer, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that a considered approach by Thameslink and Network Rail should not lead to such a big discrepancy. Now, I recognise, I'm a realist, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know me, and I recognise that changes will always need to be made to train timetables. But consultation for these changes is and should always be key. Not just because people deserve their chance to have their say on changes that can significantly affect their working lives and their lives more generally, but it gives a chance to informed local people to point out how proposed changes can be improved for all concerned. There was an embarrassing lack of consultation on these changes, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Minister has himself admitted that there was never going to be a consultation because it would be disingenuous to consult as there were no genuine options. That is not good enough for a timetable change of this scale. I've had several meetings over the past few weeks with experts on these matters, with expertise ranging from the technical, and it took me a while to understand what they were talking about, but I got there, to the bureaucratic and the organisational, some of these experts are people who live in Harpenden, others who live outside, who said to me that alternative choices could have been made which impact Harpenden and the entire line more broadly, much less and much more evenly. In addition to the lack of consultation, what I'd like to hear from the Minister is, do we know what measures Thameslink intend to take to monitor the impact of these proposed timetable changes to come in May, to monitor the impact of these changes over the coming months, in order to reassess them in the autumn and offer a clear timescale for when customers can finally expect to see improvements? And what commitment is there to listen to and, more importantly, act on feedback from customers following the introduction of these proposed timetable changes? Yes, I give way.
Really generous to give away, and I congratulate him on securing this debate. And of course, he will know and understand that the changes for his commuters from Harpenden and mine from Luton are direct knock-on from the process with East Midlands trains being taken out in the peak in the mornings, and also the running of fast services to replace that. He's absolutely right in saying that speed is of the essence here, and making sure this doesn't prolong for 3 years or so is actually something the Minister can really focus in on.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman, and he's well informed on these issues, and generally always well informed when he comes to this House. And I would like to agree with him that this is really not just, and of course the focus of my remarks is Harpenden, but of course this affects many, many colleagues on both sides of the House, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I do urge the Minister to bear all these specific concerns in mind. Now, it's my understanding, Mr Deputy Speaker, that it is a term of the franchise agreement between Thameslink and the Department of Transport that if there is to be a material adverse impact on passengers because of changes, there should be, indeed there must be, a 12-week consultation period. Now, I've asked, previous to this debate, I've asked the Minister and the Secretary of State several times if they agree that these changes do in fact represent a material adverse impact. And if they disagree with that, could they please possibly describe, what would they describe these changes to be? How would they characterise these changes? Now, I want to make this point very clearly to the House. The impact of these timetable changes goes beyond changing what time people arrive at work or at home. A key issue that has been raised with me time and time again has been the impact on working parents, especially working mothers. Working parents have particularly tight windows for getting into work, getting back from work. I know, as the parent to two small boys, Zach and Sam, and the husband to a working mother myself, that organising childcare around the commute is a hugely important factor in any working parent's day. So for Thameslink's changes to cause so much disruption to so many people, I believe, is unacceptable. Let me describe, if you'd indulge me, Mr Deputy Speaker, the impact of these changes on my constituents. And I'll use two particular examples of people who've written to me and emailed me on this point. The first, I am a mother of 3 school-aged children, and I'm recovering from breast cancer. In the recent months, I've chosen to catch a semi-fast service, the 718, to be able to get a seat in order to minimise the stress and impact on my health. This service will no longer stop at Harpenden. I will have to catch an earlier train, on which there is unlikely to be seats, both due to the reduction in trains and the fact that Thameslink will have thousands of extra customers a day due to East Midlands trains reducing the services, stopping at Bedford and Luton, as the Honourable Gentleman described. I'm concerned about the impact on my health. I'm concerned about my ability to get to work on time, and I'm concerned about the time that I can spend with my children. The second constituent. I fear for my wife, who has to drop our son at nursery at 7:30 and therefore has no option but to travel at an already busy time. I can't see anything other than a negative impact for her on what is already a far from ideal journey, given the current numbers of people using these services, the lack of space and the lack of seats. The return journey may be considerably worse than today, and the reduction in services could potentially make it difficult to get back to nursery on time, particularly when there are problems on the track or any problems with the trains. Now, these are just 2 examples, But there have been similar concerns have been repeated to me again and again and again by worried parents and by people across Harpenden of all ages and circumstances who commute into London for work. Now, I accept, and I'm sure the Minister would agree, that dealing with Britain's train network is a real challenge for the Department, for Network Rail, and for the ministers and senior civil servants involved. Overcrowding on the network is nothing new, with rail passenger journeys more than doubling over the past 20 years. At St Pancras Station alone, which is the key station both for Hitchin and Harpenden commuters, over 36,000 passengers arrive during morning peak. And another 30,000 go into Blackfriars Station, which has the worst overcrowding in London. The trains from Harpenden have seen passenger numbers grow year on year, with the service now bursting at the seams, as any Harpenden commuter can tell you if they get on the train at peak time. Now, it's worth pointing out, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that use of Thameslink has grown faster than expected when the programme began. Originally, it was predicted a 0.5 to 1% yearly increase in passenger numbers over the lifetime of the Thameslink programme. However, Thameslink now carries 40% more passengers than it did even 7 years ago. The Public Accounts Committee, of which I'm a proud member, has reported on Thameslink's problems and found recently that the knock-on effect of issues along the entire Thameslink network mean that the number of trains reaching their destination within 5 minutes of scheduled time has fallen from 91.4% to 83%. Now, it's important to make the point that a big part of the reason why passenger numbers have grown so much is an indication in some part of the success of the service. Harpenden wouldn't be such a desirable place to live if the service wasn't, broadly speaking, a good one. However, with that service facing this growth, with that passenger growth comes the immense challenge of managing it appropriately and keeping costs down for passengers. And I'm afraid that Thameslink appear to be failing on both of these counts. Bearing in mind these levels of overcrowding and the increasingly stretched service as I've already described, Harpenden commuters into London currently pay just over £3,800 a year for an annual ticket, well over £4,000 if you include a tube travel card, which most commuters would have to. In comparison, a season ticket from Woking, and I've got nothing against Woking, they're very nice people, but a season ticket from Woking, which is a very similar distance to London from Harpenden, is £400 cheaper, whilst Basildon, again, wonderful place, very nice people, but Basildon to London, again, a very similar distance, is £1,000 cheaper. The point I'm trying to make, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that Harpenden commuters are paying their fair share, and they're travelling the same distance for more money and facing a real disruption to services without any compensation whatsoever. Now, all of these issues, the timetable changes, delayed services, overcrowding, have caused huge concern for my constituents and have resulted in me raising questions with both the Secretary of State and the Minister repeatedly. In respect of the upcoming changes, due to come into force on the 21st of May for at least 2 years, I believe that there are some key questions that need to be addressed and have so far gone unanswered. The first, when was the decision made to make changes on East Midlands trains that would impact Harpenden? And at what stage were changes to Harpenden services considered and decided upon? The second, could the Minister explain why Harpenden is seeing a loss in services during peak morning and evening times, while St Albans, as I've already described, is receiving a big increase, especially considering the increased footfall from Bedford through Harpenden? Third, what is going to be the impact on Harpenden commuters from Bedford passengers being on the Thameslink line during peak times, considering an increase in passenger numbers combined with a reduction in frequency and capacity of service? How many more passengers will be on the trains to London, arriving in Harpenden in a morning as a result of these timetable changes? The next, by GTR's own admittance, some of the proposed improvements that will come into effect at the end of 2018 are at the mercy of engineering works further down the line in Kent. What is the risk, I asked the Minister, what is the risk, realistically, that these works will not be completed in time, therefore extending the problem Harpenden commuters are facing even further? The next, there is a huge concern, as I've already described, around the lack of consultation with local people, despite there being a clear material adverse impact to services because of these timetable changes. And to add insult to injury, Thameslink are still claiming that the service won't be significantly impacted. Does the Minister agree that there is going to be a material adverse change and therefore should have been a consultation? And if he does not, what does he see these changes as? Finally, and I suppose most importantly, when will Harpenden commuters finally get the service they deserve and have been promised for so long? Now, I'm not just coming to complain, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There are proposed solutions available that could be implemented as soon as May, despite the insistence from senior officials at GTR that they are not workable. I myself have put several suggestions to GTR officials when we met a few weeks ago, and yet there's been no consultation to discuss these alternatives. One suggestion is to have 5 trains from Bedford to London stop at Harpenden in addition to stopping at St Albans, which would add between 3 and 4 minutes to their journey. Now, I understand that there will be complexities around getting all the trains into London at a reasonable time, bearing in mind this extra 3 or 4 minutes, but I do not believe, and experts that I've consulted do not believe that these changes would be insurmountable. Another, simpler solution that would increase capacity, although not solve the issue of train frequency, would be for the Minister to completely declassify all first-class carriages during peak times from Harpenden. This would give some needed relief to passengers on what will be an increasingly overcrowded service. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Harpenden Commuters Group, notably Emily Ketchin, for their timeless and tireless campaigning and lobbying of me on this issue. And Harpenden councillors haven't been far behind, in particular Mary Maynard and Teresa Heritage. Thank you for helping me understand how much these changes are affecting Harpenden residents. There will be those, not in this chamber now, but there will be those outside who don't think that timetable changes or the impacts on commuters are really that important. But I believe it is of critical importance, not just to the individual passengers as I've already set out, but because if we want to keep London and the South East as the most dynamic regional economy in Europe, people need to be able to get to work on time, not packed like cattle, at a reasonable price. And, importantly, when major changes are to be made to their service, which must happen from time to time, passengers should be consulted and treated like adults and paying customers. I know that the Minister wants to do his best for Harpenden commuters. I also know him to be a highly intelligent and thoughtful man, as the whole House will appreciate. Please, Minister, carefully consider the concerns of Harpenden commuters that I've expressed in the course of this debate, and give them hope that the future will be better with an improved, not reduced service, and strengthen their damaged faith in our rail transport network.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I would like to start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Hitchin and Harpenden, for securing this debate, which follows on from conversations we've had in meetings we held on the 22nd of March. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to begin with the specific issue of the changes to the timetable. Harpenden is on the Midland Main Line, which runs from London to Nottingham and Sheffield, which, as members know, is undergoing its largest upgrade since it was built in the 19th century. This is a necessary and urgent upgrade as the number of passenger journeys taken on Britain's rail network has doubled in the last 20 years. And as part of this upgrade, a 4th track is being built north of Bedford to Kettering, which will provide space for an additional train path from December 2020. Unfortunately, to allow these works to take place, some difficult decisions have had to be taken. East Midlands Trains' fast peak time services will not call at Bedford or Luton from May 2018 to December 2020. Instead, displaced East Midlands Trains passengers from Bedford and Luton will be able to travel on fast Thameslink services which will not stop at Harpenden. In answer to my honourable friend's first question, this decision was made in November 2017, once industry had exhausted all alternative options. I obviously completely understand the concerns of commuters from his constituency. However, steps have been taken so that, despite the unavoidable loss of 2 fast peak services, overall, the capacity from Harpenden in the morning will be roughly the same as today, with only 4 fewer carriages across the entire 3-hour morning peak. there will be an increase in capacity during the evening peak, with an additional 20 carriages, bringing an additional 1,242 seats. In addition, it is expected that most Bedford commuters will opt to take the fast Thameslink services rather than those that stop at Harpenden, and it's possible that this will reduce rather than increase crowding on Harpenden services. My honourable friend raised the issue of St Albans City Station, which requires a capacity increase as it carries, as he acknowledged, twice as many passengers as Harpenden and already has issues of its own with crowding on platforms. On the question of the potential for engineering works in Kent to delay the improvements for Harpenden, these are minor works and are currently on schedule to be completed on time. There is minimal risk to passengers from Harpenden. From December 2018, an additional service will be scheduled in both the morning and evening peaks, and 2 trains will be lengthened from 8 to 12 carriages, and this will provide a capacity increase in both peaks. From December 2020, when the upgrade to the Midlands Main Line is complete, Thameslink will reinstate the fast services that have been withdrawn and add 4 more 12-car peak services at Harpenden. This will result in an additional 2 fast 12-car trains per hour compared to the May timetable, and this will provide a substantially improved service for Harpenden commuters. Now, I would like to apologise again to my honourable friend, as the full benefits of the Thameslink programme will be delayed for commuters from his constituency, as he knows. In the context of the major engineering works necessary to bring the Midland Main Line into the 21st century, this was, however, the best available solution to us. I also think that we should not lose sight of the many benefits which the Thameslink programme will bring to passengers from Harpenden and the wider Thameslink network. New trains, more reliable journeys, and a substantial increase in capacity from 2020. He mentioned the problems with consultation, which, again, we discussed extensively in our previous meetings. I would like to emphasise that ahead of this timetable change, Thameslink has carried out one of the largest and in some ways most effective consultations that we've ever seen on the railways. In fact, it, as a result of these consultations, has made hundreds of changes to its plans. Yes, happy to.
I'm most grateful, Minister. And I'd actually just endorse what the Minister has just said. We see a net benefit in my Horsham constituency from the changes to the timetable, and I have had constituents who are very impressed by changes that have been made as a result of the consultation. But like my honourable friend, I do have one station in particular which is losing services in that peak critical time when they need to get into London to work. Would the Minister, in addition to the questions asked by my honourable friend, assure the House that this is going to continue to be kept under review, that we can look at this again when we see the full import of the timetable and its impact on our commuters?
I thank my honourable friend, the member for Horsham, for bringing to our attention the issues faced by his constituents. I think at the station of Balcombe, in particular, and I would just say that there will be further opportunities to lobby for timetabling changes at the next iteration. May is obviously set in stone at this point, but there is always going to be a December timetable and then and subsequent timetables after that. So these things aren't set in stone. This has been one of the biggest timetabling changes the network has ever seen, and understandably not everything is going to satisfy everybody at every moment in time. Happy to give way.
I'm extremely grateful to hear that from the Minister. Of course, this is a rolling series of timetable changes over the next 3 years at every 6-month interval. And I think members in this House would be extremely grateful to hear from the Minister his willingness to keep a close eye on this issue at each of those timetable changes, rather than necessarily rely on the plans it currently stands today to go for 2.5 years.
Sure. I think this has been one of the biggest timetabling changes the system has ever undertaken, and as I said, it won't have satisfied everybody in its first iteration, but December is coming along in not too lengthy a period of time, and honourable members are always welcome to put suggestions to the department and to their operators for consideration. The impact of the Midland Main Line works only became apparent to us in November 17, as I mentioned, and this short timeline meant that a specific consultation for Harpenden passengers was simply not a viable option. To give my honourable friend some background, the detailed work to implement the May timetable on the Thameslink routes began more than a year ago now. This timetable rewrite, as I've been saying, has been unprecedented in its scale. Every service on this part of the network is being altered in order to bring about the full benefits of the Thameslink programme. And as work progressed, the department was advised that there were likely to be some temporary negative impacts on some services as a result of the complexity of this undertaking. By the time this became clear, it would have been disingenuous, as he acknowledged in his remarks, to consult, as there was by that stage only one viable option before us. Since that point, industry professionals have been working to address as many of these negative effects as physically possible. Whilst it has not been possible to eliminate them all, the industry will continue to work to improve the timetable at every subsequent opportunity. As an MP myself, whose constituency sits on the Thameslink network, I share many of the concerns that have been raised today in this debate. But we shouldn't lose sight, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of the fact that the Thameslink programme is an incredibly ambitious investment which will transform travel across the South East for the coming decades. We've already seen new trains rolled out across the Thameslink network, replacing trains that were first introduced in the 1980s. The new trains carry far more people and will allow Thameslink to meet the demands of a 21st century city. These trains have live information screens so that passengers know if their tube line is delayed. These trains have wide entrances and gangways, making it easier for passengers to move around and get on and off the train. And we've already seen substantial investment in stations. While the £1 billion redevelopment of London Bridge is perhaps the best known, there have been investments made across the network so that the benefits of the programme can be felt across the whole of the South East. We've also seen substantial investment in infrastructure upgrades, including the replacement of tracks and signals and the repair of bridges and tunnels. This means that passengers will get the resilient and reliable service that they deserve.
The question is this House to now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.